The roaring waters of the swollen Arkansas River threatened to swallow Zoey Barton whole as she clutched the side of her wagon, her knuckles white with desperation. It was 1878 in the Colorado Territory, and the spring floods had come earlier and fiercer than anyone in Manassas had predicted. "Help!" She screamed, her voice barely audible over the thunderous rush of the water. The current had already swept away one of her horses, and the other was thrashing wildly, its eyes rolling in terror. The wagon tilted precariously as the raging waters pushed against it. Zoey's life was flashing before her eyes, 23 years of memories threatening to end in this merciless river. Miles Zimmerman heard her cries while riding along the riverbank. At 28, he was already an experienced rancher who had seen his share of tragedies in the West. Without hesitation, he dismounted his stallion, removed his gun belt and boots, and plunged into the churning waters. "Hold on," he shouted, fighting against the current that threatened to knock him off his feet. The cold water seeped through his clothes, but determination kept him moving forward. He could see the terror in the young woman's eyes, her blonde hair plastered to her pale face. The wagon shifted again, and Zoey let out another desperate cry. Her supplies, everything she owned in the world, were being claimed by the river. The trunk containing her mother's wedding dress, her father's pocket watch, all the precious mementos of a life left behind in St. Louis. Miles reached the wagon just as it began to tip further. With one powerful motion, he grabbed Zoey's arm and pulled her from the doomed vehicle. "I've got you," he assured her, his voice steady despite the danger surrounding them. "Just hold on to me." Zoey wrapped her arms around his neck, trembling with fear and cold. "My things," she sobbed against his shoulder. "Things can be replaced," Miles replied firmly. "You can't." With that, he began the arduous journey back to shore, fighting the current every step of the way. By the time they reached the riverbank, Zoey's wagon had disappeared completely beneath the churning waters. She collapsed onto the muddy ground, gasping for breath between sobs. Miles knelt beside her, his own breathing labored. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for any sign of injury. Zoey shook her head, still too overcome to speak properly. Her simple calico dress clung to her body, and she shivered uncontrollably in the spring breeze. Miles removed his duster coat, which he had left on the shore, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "My name's Miles Zimmerman. I've got a ranch about 3 miles east of here." "Zoey Barton," she managed to say through chattering teeth. I was headed to Manassas." "My uncle has a general store there," Miles nodded. "I know the place. Walter Barton's store right on Main Street." Zoey's eyes widened slightly. "You know my uncle?" "Everyone knows everyone in these parts," Miles replied with a gentle smile. "That's the way it is out here." He helped her to her feet and led her to his horse. "I'll take you to my ranch. It's closer than town, and you need to get warm and dry." Zoey hesitated, her upbringing warning her about the impropriety of going alone to a stranger's home. But the alternative was a long, cold walk to Manassas, and she had already nearly died once today. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman," she said formally, allowing him to help her onto the horse. "Miles," he corrected, mounting behind her. "Out here, formality doesn't mean much when you've just pulled someone from a river." As they rode toward his ranch, Zoey's mind raced with the implications of her situation. Everything she owned was gone. The money she had saved for 3 years working as a schoolteacher in St. Louis, the letters from her parents before they passed from influenza, the books she had cherished all swept away by the merciless Arkansas River. Miles' ranch came into view as they crested a small hill, a modest but well-built cabin with a large barn and corral. Several horses grazed in a fenced pasture, and smoke rose from the chimney. "Rosa must have the fire going," Miles commented. "She's my housekeeper, comes in 3 times a week from town." Relief flooded through Zoey at the mention of another woman's presence. As they approached, an older Mexican woman appeared at the door, her eyes widening at the sight of them. "Dios mío, what happened?" she exclaimed, hurrying down the steps. River accident, Miles explained briefly as he dismounted and helped Zoey down. Miss Barton needs dry clothes and something hot to drink. Rosa nodded and immediately took Zoey's arm, leading her inside. Come, señorita, we will get you warm. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly comfortable, simple, but clean, with practical furniture and a few touches that spoke of care. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a bearskin rug spread before it. Rosa quickly gathered some clothes. These belonged to Mr. Zimmerman's sister when she visited last summer. They might be a bit large, but they are dry. Zoey changed behind a screen in the corner of the main room while Rosa prepared hot tea. The borrowed dress was indeed a bit large, but the warm, dry fabric felt like heaven against her skin. When she emerged, Miles was standing by the fire, his own clothes changed. He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her heart skip a beat. Better, he asked. Zoey nodded, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. Much, thank you for the clothes, and for saving my life. Miles waved away her thanks. Anyone would have done the same. Not anyone would have risked the river at that height, Rosa interjected, bringing a steaming mug to Zoey. The señor is too modest. He is very brave. Zoey accepted the tea gratefully, wrapping her still cold fingers around the warm ceramic. I don't know what I'm going to do now, she admitted quietly. Everything I owned was in that wagon. Miles sat in a chair across from her. We'll ride into Manasseh tomorrow. Your uncle will be glad to know you're safe, and we can figure out what to do from there. I was coming to work in his store, Zoey explained. After my parents died last year, there wasn't much keeping me in St. Louis. Uncle Walter wrote that he could use the help. Walter's a good man, Miles said with a nod. Been running that store for 15 years now. He's fair in his dealings. Rosa bustled about, preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and beef stew. The homey smells filled the cabin, and Zoey realized she was ravenously hungry. As they ate, Miles told her about the area, the small town of Manasseh, the surrounding ranches, the challenges and rewards of life in the Colorado Territory. Zoey found herself drawn to his calm confidence, the way he spoke about the land with such respect and understanding. How long have you been here? She asked. 7 years, Miles replied. Came out after the war with what was left of my family, just my sister and me. Built this place up from nothing. There was pride in his voice, but no boasting. What about you? Were you a teacher back east? Zoey nodded. For 3 years. But after my parents passed, the school seemed smaller somehow. I needed a change. Well, you've certainly found it, Miles said with a slight smile. The West has a way of changing a person. I'm beginning to see that, Zoey replied, thinking of how different her arrival had been from what she'd imagined. Instead of rolling into town with her possessions and savings, she was sitting in a stranger's home wearing borrowed clothes, with nothing to her name but the water-damaged locket around her neck. After dinner, Rosa prepared to leave. I will tell Señor Barton that his niece is safe, she assured Zoey. My son and I live just on the edge of town. Thank you, Rosa, Zoey said gratefully. Please let him know I'll come to town tomorrow. After Rosa left, an awkward silence fell over the cabin. The impropriety of their situation wasn't lost on either of them, despite the circumstances that had brought it about. You can take my bedroom, Miles said, gesturing to a door on the right. I'll sleep out here by the fire. I couldn't possibly displace you, Zoey began, but Miles shook his head. I insist, it's no hardship. I've slept in far worse places during roundups. Zoey reluctantly agreed, too exhausted to argue further. The bedroom, like the rest of the cabin, was simple but comfortable. A large bed with a quilt dominated the space, and a small dresser stood against one wall. A window looked out toward the mountains, now silhouetted against the darkening sky. As she settled into the unfamiliar bed, Zoey's mind whirled with the day's events. Just that morning, she had been so full of hope for her new beginning in Manasseh. Now, everything was uncertain. Yet, amid the chaos and loss, there was Miles Zimmerman, a stranger who had risked his life to save hers without a second thought. With these conflicting emotions swirling through her mind, Zoe finally drifted into an exhausted sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-addled brain. Then the memories of the previous day came flooding back, and she sat up quickly. After dressing in the same borrowed clothes, Zoe emerged from the bedroom to find Miles at the small stove, expertly flipping flapjacks in a cast iron skillet. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Thought you might be hungry." "Thank you," Zoe replied, smoothing her hair self-consciously. Without a brush, she had done her best to make herself presentable, but she felt disheveled and out of place. "I didn't expect you to cook," Miles shrugged. "Been cooking for myself for years." "Rosa only comes a few days a week." He slid a plate of flapjacks and bacon toward her. "Eat up. We've got a ride ahead of us." As they ate, Zoe found herself studying Miles more carefully. In the morning light, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, evidence of years squinting against the sun. His hands were strong and calloused, his movements efficient. There was nothing frivolous about Miles Zimmerman. Everything about him spoke of practicality and purpose. After breakfast, they saddled up for the ride to Manasseh. Miles insisted Zoe take his good saddle while he rode with just a blanket. The spring morning was glorious, with birds singing and wildflowers beginning to dot the prairie. It was hard to believe that just a day earlier, Zoe had been fighting for her life in the river. "The Arkansas can be treacherous this time of year," Miles explained as they rode. "The snowmelt from the mountains comes down fast. Was the crossing marked when you tried it?" Zoe shook her head. "There was a sign, but it had been knocked down. I thought I knew where the ford was supposed to be." Miles frowned. "That's dangerous. I'll talk to Sheriff Daniels about getting it properly marked again." As they approached Manasseh, Zoe felt a fluttering of anxiety. How would she explain her situation to Uncle Walter? What would he think of her arriving with a strange man, wearing borrowed clothes? The town was smaller than she had expected, one main street with various businesses lining both sides. A church steeple rose at one end, and the sheriff's office and jail stood prominently in the center. People moved about their morning business, women in practical dresses and men in work clothes or cowboy attire. Barton's general store was a large building with a wide porch. Several wooden rocking chairs sat empty, waiting for the usual afternoon gatherers who would come to exchange news and gossip. A man in his 60s emerged from the store just as they approached. His gray hair and beard were neatly trimmed, and despite his age, he stood straight and tall. His eyes widened as he recognized his niece. "Zoe, thank God," Walter Barton exclaimed, hurrying down the steps. "Rosa told us what happened. We were so worried." Zoe dismounted with Miles' help and found herself enveloped in her uncle's embrace. "I'm sorry for arriving like this," she began, but Walter waved away her apologies. "The important thing is that you're safe," he insisted, then turned to Miles. "And we have you to thank for that, Zimmerman. Rosa told us how you pulled her from the river." Miles nodded modestly. "Just happened to be riding by at the right time." Walter clasped Miles' hand firmly. "Well, I'm in your debt. Come inside, both of you. Martha's been beside herself with worry." Inside the store, Zoe was introduced to her Aunt Martha, a kind-faced woman who immediately fussed over her, examining her for injuries and expressing her relief at Zoe's safe arrival. The store itself was impressive, well-stocked with everything from dry goods to tools, cloth to ammunition. "We've got the room all ready for you upstairs," Martha told her. "It's small, but it's yours for as long as you need it." "Thank you," Zoe replied gratefully. "I'm afraid I've lost everything in the river, my clothes, my savings, everything." Walter's face grew serious. "That's a hard blow, but things can be replaced. We'll help you get back on your feet." Miles, who had been standing quietly by the door, spoke up. "I should be getting back to the ranch. Got work waiting." Walter turned to him. You must join us for dinner tonight, Miles. It's the least we can do to thank you. Miles hesitated, then nodded. Much obliged. I'll come by after I finish my chores. As he tipped his hat to leave, his eyes met Zoey's. Something unspoken passed between them, a connection forged in those desperate moments in the river. Zoey felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. Thank you again, she said softly. For everything. Miles nodded once, a small smile playing at his lips. See you at dinner, Miss Barton. After he left, Martha showed Zoey to her room, a cozy space with a comfortable bed, a small dresser, and a washstand. A window overlooked the main street of Manassas. I've put a few dresses in the dresser, Martha told her. They might need altering, but they'll do until we can make you some new ones. You're too kind, Zoey said, feeling overwhelmed by her aunt and uncle's generosity. Nonsense, Martha replied briskly. Family takes care of family, that's how we survive out here. Left alone, Zoey washed up and changed into one of the dresses Martha had provided. It was plain but clean, and it felt good to be in proper clothes again. As she braided her hair, her thoughts kept returning to Miles Zimmerman. There was something about him that intrigued her, his quiet strength, his matter-of-fact bravery, the way his eyes seemed to see right through her. She shook her head, trying to dismiss these thoughts. She had only just arrived in Manassas. Her focus should be on establishing herself here, on helping in the store, on rebuilding what she had lost. Yet as she looked out the window at the small western town that was to be her new home, she couldn't help wondering when she would see Miles Zimmerman again. That evening, Zoey helped Martha prepare dinner. Her aunt was a good cook, and the kitchen soon filled with the enticing aromas of roast beef, fresh bread, and apple pie. Miles Zimmerman is a good man, Martha commented as they worked. One of the most respected ranchers in the area, despite his age. He seems very capable, Zoey replied carefully. Martha smiled knowingly. That he is. Came out here with almost nothing after losing their family farm in the war, built up that ranch through sheer determination. Never complains, always ready to help a neighbor. Has he never married? Zoey asked, trying to sound merely curious. No, though not for lack of interest from the local girls, Martha chuckled. He's focused on his ranch. Said once he wanted to build something solid before thinking about a family. This information settled in Zoey's mind as she continued helping with dinner preparations. By the time Miles arrived, promptly at 6, she had composed herself enough to greet him with appropriate gratitude rather than the inexplicable fluttering she felt at the sight of him cleaned up, his dark hair still damp from washing, wearing a fresh shirt and his best jeans. Dinner was a pleasant affair. Walter regaled them with stories of Manassas' early days when the town was little more than a collection of tents and rough cabins. Miles spoke about his ranch and his plans to expand his herd. Throughout the meal, Zoey found herself sneaking glances at Miles, admiring the way he listened intently to her uncle, the respect evident in his posture and words. After dinner, while Martha and Zoey cleared the table, Walter invited Miles to join him for a pipe on the small porch behind the store. Your niece seems like a strong woman, Miles commented as they sat in the gathering dusk. Not many would have held on like she did in that river. Walter nodded proudly. Bartons have grit. Her father, my brother, was the same way, faced whatever came at him head on. He puffed on his pipe thoughtfully. She's had a rough time of it, losing both parents so young, and now this. She'll land on her feet, Miles said confidently. Seems like the type. That she is, Walter agreed. Still, I worry, this isn't St. Louis. Life out here can be hard on a woman alone. Miles said nothing to this, but his thoughts were churning. He hadn't been able to get Zoey Barton out of his mind since pulling her from the river, the determination in her eyes, even as she clung to that sinking wagon, the surprising softness of her hand in his as he helped her to shore. Inside, Zoey and Martha were washing the dishes when Martha suddenly said, He hasn't taken his eyes off you all evening. Zoey nearly dropped the plate she was drying. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Martha laughed softly. Miles Zimmerman. I've known that boy for 7 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Aunt Martha, Zoey protested, feeling her cheeks grow warm. He saved my life yesterday. He's just being concerned. If you say so, Martha replied, unconvinced. But a woman my age recognizes these things. Before Zoey could respond, the men returned from the porch. Miles thanked Martha for the meal and prepared to leave. I'll be by tomorrow to help unload the supply wagon, he told Walter. Should arrive mid-morning from Alamosa. Much appreciated, Walter replied. Good hands are always welcome. As Miles turned to leave, his eyes met Zoey's. Miss Barton, I hope you're settling in well. Yes, thank you, she replied, suddenly shy under his steady gaze. And please call me Zoey. A small smile touched his lips. Zoey, then. Perhaps you'll join us for the spring social next Saturday. The whole town turns out for dancing and food at the meeting hall. Zoey's heart skipped a beat. Was this an invitation? I would like that, she managed to say. Good, Miles said simply. Good night, then. After he left, Zoey endured knowing looks from both her aunt and uncle, but neither made any comment. That night, as she lay in her new bed, Zoey found herself replaying her conversations with Miles, analyzing every word, every glance. It was foolish, she knew. She had only just arrived in Manasseh. She had lost everything and needed to focus on rebuilding her life. Yet she couldn't help the hope that blossomed in her chest at the thought of seeing Miles Zimmerman again. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Zoey learned the routines of the general store. Walter was a patient teacher, showing her how to manage inventory, deal with customers, and handle the account books. She discovered she had a talent for organization and soon implemented a new system for tracking stock that impressed her uncle. Miles came by the store almost daily, sometimes with legitimate business, sometimes with transparent excuses that made Martha hide her smile. Each time, he would spend a few minutes talking with Zoey, asking about her adjustment to life in Manasseh, telling her stories about the area. 5 days after her arrival, Miles appeared at the store with something wrapped in brown paper. Found this downstream, he said, handing the package to Zoey. Thought it might be yours. Curious, Zoey unwrapped the package to find a small, waterlogged book, her journal, which she had kept faithfully for years. The pages were water-damaged, but mostly intact. How did you? She began, looking up at him in wonder. Miles shrugged. Been riding the riverbanks when I can, looking for anything that might have washed up from your wagon. Found that caught in some branches about 2 miles downstream. Zoey was speechless. The thought of him searching for her belongings, taking time from his busy days to ride along the river, touched her deeply. Thank you, she finally managed. This means more than I can say. Glad I found it, Miles replied simply. Then, with a touch of hesitation unusual for him, he added, I was wondering if you might like to ride out to my ranch on Sunday after church. Rosa makes a fine Sunday dinner, and I could show you some of the countryside. Zoey's heart leaped at the invitation. I would enjoy that very much, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Miles nodded, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips. I'll come by to get you then. Sunday couldn't come fast enough for Zoey. She attended the small church with Walter and Martha, finding the simple service comforting in its familiarity. Afterwards, as promised, Miles was waiting outside with 2 horses. Hope you don't mind riding, he said, as he helped her mount a gentle mare. Thought it would be nicer than the wagon. Zoey adjusted her skirts over the side saddle. I enjoy riding, she assured him, though I'm a bit out of practice. The ride to Miles' ranch was pleasant, with Miles pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. Zoey found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn to his dry humor and straightforward manner. At the ranch, Rosa had indeed prepared a magnificent Sunday dinner: roast chicken, fresh vegetables from her garden, and a berry cobbler that had Zoey asking for the recipe. After the meal, Miles suggested a walk to the creek that ran through his property. The spring day was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, and wildflowers dotting the grassland. "Your ranch is beautiful," Zoey commented as they walked side by side. "You must be very proud of what you've built here." Miles nodded, looking out over the land with evident satisfaction. "It's been hard work, but worth it. Started with just 50 acres and a dozen cattle. Now I've got 500 acres and over 200 head." There was no boasting in his tone, just quiet pride. They reached the creek, a clear, rushing stream lined with cottonwoods. Miles led her to a flat rock overlooking the water, and they sat in comfortable silence for a few moments. "I never properly thanked you," Zoey said suddenly. "For saving my life that day." Miles looked at her, his eyes serious. "You don't need to thank me, Zoey. I did what anyone would do." "Not anyone would have waded into that river," she countered. "It was incredibly brave." Miles seemed almost embarrassed by her praise. "When I heard you crying for help, I didn't think about the danger. I just knew I had to reach you." Something in his voice made Zoey's heart beat faster. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the capable rancher, but a man of deep feeling beneath the reserved exterior. "I'm glad it was you who found me," she said softly. Miles' eyes held hers, and for a moment, Zoey thought he might say something more. Instead, he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering briefly against her cheek. "So am I," he replied quietly. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then, Miles stood and offered his hand to help her up. "I should get you back to town before your aunt and uncle start to worry." The ride back to Manassas was quieter, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with shared glances and small smiles. When they reached the store, Miles dismounted and helped Zoey down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for today," Zoey said, suddenly shy. "My pleasure," Miles replied. "Don't forget about the social on Saturday." "I wouldn't miss it," Zoey assured him. As she watched him ride away, Zoey knew with certainty that something significant had shifted between them. What had begun as gratitude was growing into something much deeper. The week passed slowly, with Zoey throwing herself into work at the store to distract from her anticipation of Saturday's social. She helped Martha sew a new dress for the occasion, a pretty blue calico that complemented her eyes. "You'll be the belle of the ball," Martha declared when Zoey tried on the finished dress. "Miles won't know what hit him." Zoey blushed at her aunt's teasing but couldn't deny the flutter of excitement she felt at the thought of dancing with Miles. Saturday evening arrived at last. The meeting hall was transformed with lanterns and spring flowers, and it seemed the entire population of Manassas and the surrounding ranches had turned out for the event. A small band played lively tunes, and tables laden with food and drink lined one wall. Zoey entered with Walter and Martha, immediately searching the crowd for Miles. She spotted him across the room, deep in conversation with Sheriff Daniels. As if sensing her presence, he looked up, and their eyes met. A slow smile spread across his face, and he excused himself to make his way toward her. "You look beautiful," he said simply when he reached her. "Thank you," Zoey replied, taking in his appearance he wore his Sunday best, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. The first dance was a lively Virginia reel that had everyone laughing and clapping. Miles proved to be a capable dancer, guiding Zoey through the steps with confidence. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, alternating between energetic group dances and slower waltzes that allowed them to talk. During one such waltz, Miles said, "I've been thinking about building an addition to my house. The place seems too small lately." "Oh." Zoey replied, curious about this sudden change of subject. Miles nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "A proper dining room, maybe another bedroom or two. Rosa says a house needs a woman's touch to really be a home." Zoey's heart skipped a beat at the implication. "That sounds like a significant project." "I don't mind hard work when the result is worthwhile," Miles said meaningfully. Before Zoey could respond, the music ended, and they were separated by well-meaning friends and neighbors who wanted to chat. But throughout the evening, Miles' words echoed in her mind, filling her with a warm hope. As the social wound down, Miles offered to walk Zoey, Walter, and Martha back to the store. The night was clear, with a canopy of stars overhead and a nearly full moon lighting their way. Walter and Martha walked ahead, giving Zoey and Miles a semblance of privacy. "I'd like to call on you properly," Miles said suddenly, his voice low. "If that would be agreeable to you." Zoey's heart soared at his formal request. "Yes, that would be very agreeable," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Miles stopped walking and turned to face her. In the moonlight, his features were softer, his eyes reflecting the stars above. "Zoey, I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel like I've been waiting for you without knowing it." The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. "I feel the same," she admitted. "It's as if the river brought us together for a reason." Miles reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I'm not a man who believes much in fate, but I can't deny there's something special about finding you." They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, hearts beating in rhythm. Then, with gentle reverence, Miles leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both tender and promising. When they parted, Zoey felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. The loss of her possessions in the river no longer seemed like such a tragedy. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something far more precious. The following weeks saw Miles calling regularly at the store, bringing small gifts, wildflowers he had picked, a wooden comb he had carved himself, once even a kitten he had rescued from a barn. Each gesture, each visit, deepened the connection between them. 1 month after Zoey's arrival in Manassas, Miles invited her for another Sunday at his ranch. This time, after dinner, he suggested they ride to a special spot he wanted to show her. They rode for about half an hour, climbing a gentle slope that overlooked the valley. The view was breathtaking rolling hills, the distant mountains, and Miles' ranch spread out below them. "This is my favorite place," Miles said as they dismounted. "I come here to think, to remind myself of what I'm working for." Zoey took in the vista, understanding why he loved it. "It's magnificent." Miles took her hand, leading her to a flat boulder where they could sit side by side. "Zoey, there's something I want to ask you." The seriousness in his voice made her heart race. "Yes. I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Miles turned to face her fully. "When I pulled you from that river, I had no idea I was rescuing my own future happiness. Every day since has only confirmed what I felt that first day, that you're the woman I want to share my life with." Zoey's eyes filled with tears as Miles reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, simple ring, a gold band with a single pearl. "Zoey Barton, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up inside her, pure and overwhelming. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Miles Zimmerman, I will marry you." Miles slid the ring onto her finger, his own hands trembling slightly. Then he gathered her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise of their future together. That evening, when they returned to town and shared their news with Walter and Martha, the older couple's delight was evident. Walter clapped Miles on the shoulder and welcomed him to the family, while Martha wiped away happy tears. "I knew from the moment he brought you to the store that first day," Martha confided to Zoey later. "There was something in the way he looked at you, like he'd found a treasure more valuable than gold." Plans for the wedding moved quickly. The entire town seemed invested in the romance, the brave rancher who had saved the newcomer from certain death, only to lose his heart to her in return. It was the kind of story people loved, especially in a place where life could be harsh and unpredictable. They decided on a June wedding, giving them time to prepare, but not so long that they had to endure a prolonged engagement. Miles threw himself into expanding his house, often working from dawn till dusk to ensure it would be ready for his bride. Zoey divided her time between helping at the store and preparing for married life. She sewed linens for their home, learned Rosa's recipes, and rode out to the ranch whenever possible to offer input on the renovations. 2 weeks before the wedding, Miles surprised Zoey by taking her to the spot along the river where he had pulled her from the water. The spring floods had long since receded, and the Arkansas flowed peacefully within its banks. "Why did you bring me here?" Zoey asked, curious about revisiting the scene of her near tragedy. Miles took her hand, leading her to the riverbank. "I've been thinking about how close I came to losing you before I even knew you." His voice was serious, his eyes reflecting the water's surface. "It made me realize how precious every moment is, how quickly life can change." Zoey squeezed his hand. "But you did find me. You saved me." Miles turned to her, his expression intense. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you're safe and happy." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "I found this yesterday, caught in some branches downstream. Thought you might want it back." He placed a small, tarnished locket in her palm, the very one she had been wearing the day of the accident, which had somehow come loose in the river. Zoey gasped, tears filling her eyes as she recognized the family heirloom she had thought lost forever. "My grandmother's locket. Oh, Miles." She opened it carefully, revealing the tiny photographs of her parents inside, miraculously preserved despite their submersion. "I know how much you lost that day," Miles said softly. "I can't bring it all back, but I wanted you to have this piece of your family with you when we start our own." Overwhelmed with emotion, Zoey threw her arms around him. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "So much." Miles held her close, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "And I love you, Zoey Barton, more than I thought possible." Their wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. The small church was decorated with wildflowers, and it seemed the entire population of Manasseh had turned out for the occasion. Zoey wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her make, with her grandmother's recovered locket around her neck. As she walked down the aisle on Walter's arm, her eyes fixed on Miles waiting at the altar, Zoey felt a profound sense of rightness. The journey that had brought her here had been filled with loss and hardship, but it had led her to this moment, to this man who looked at her as if she were the sun itself. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Miles kissed her with tender reverence, cheers erupted throughout the church. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with dancing, feasting, and countless well wishes from friends and neighbors. When they finally rode to the ranch, their home, the stars were bright overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and summer grass. Miles had added a proper porch to the cabin, and he carried Zoey across the threshold with careful ceremony. Inside, the house had been transformed. The new dining room gleamed with a table Miles had crafted himself, and the bedroom now featured a larger bed with a wedding quilt the women of Manasseh had made as a gift. Everything was simple but beautiful, a perfect reflection of the life they planned to build together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zimmerman," Miles said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. Zoey smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting. "It's perfect, Miles. Everything is perfect." As they stood in the center of their home, wrapped in each other's arms, Zoey thought of the river that had nearly claimed her life, but had instead given her something far more precious. The current that had threatened to pull her under had instead pushed her toward a love and happiness she had never imagined possible. 1 year later, Zoey sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Miles work with a new colt in the corral. Her hands rested on her swollen belly, feeling the movements of the child that would join their family in just a few months. The past year had been one of hard work and tremendous joy. Together, they had weathered the challenges of ranch life, a drought that threatened their crops, a difficult calving season, the everyday struggles of carving out a life on the frontier. Through it all, their love had only deepened, strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect. Miles looked up from his work and caught her watching him. With a smile that still made her heart skip a beat, he secured the colt and made his way to the porch. "How are my treasures today?" he asked, sitting beside her and placing a gentle hand on her stomach. "We're fine," Zoey assured him, covering his hand with her own. "Just enjoying the view," Miles chuckled. "I was enjoying a view myself," he said, his eyes warm as they took in his wife. Zoey leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "I was thinking about the river," she admitted. "How something that nearly took my life ended up giving me everything I could ever want." Miles pressed a kiss to her temple. "I thank God every day that I heard your cries for help, that I was there to wade in and find you." "My hero," Zoey said softly, only half teasing. "No," Miles replied seriously. "You're the brave one. You held on against that current. You rebuilt your life from nothing. You took a chance on a rough rancher who didn't know the first thing about courting a lady." Zoey laughed. "I think you did just fine in the courting department." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. The ranch was thriving under their combined efforts, Miles' practical knowledge and hard work, paired with Zoey's organizational skills and determination. They had increased the herd, improved the grazing land, and added a vegetable garden that was the envy of the county. "I have something for you," Miles said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, carved wooden box. "Happy anniversary." Zoey took the box, admiring the intricate design Miles had painstakingly carved into the lid. A river flowing through mountains, with a small cabin nestled among trees. "It's beautiful," she breathed, opening it carefully. Inside lay a delicate gold charm shaped like a miniature wagon. "To remember how our story began," Miles explained. "I had it made in Denver." Tears filled Zoey's eyes as she lifted the charm, noticing that it was designed to attach to the chain of her grandmother's locket. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Will you help me put it on?" Miles carefully added the charm to her necklace, his fingers brushing against her skin. "There," he said. "Now you have your family past and future together." Zoey touched the locket and charm, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of his gift. "I love you, Miles Zimmerman, more with each passing day." "And I love you, Zoey Zimmerman," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "You and our child are everything to me." As the sun set over their land, casting long shadows across the fields and buildings they had worked so hard to improve, Zoey reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun with terror and loss in the raging waters of the Arkansas River had transformed into a life filled with love, purpose, and hope. The river had taken her wagon, but in return, it had given her Miles the cowboy who had waded in to save her, only to become the center of her world, the foundation of her happiness. And as their child grew within her, Zoey knew that their story was still just beginning, flowing ever forward like the river that had brought them together, toward a future bright with promise. 5 years later, their ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the county. The house had expanded again to accommodate their growing family, 3-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan, who had joined their older brother William in filling the once quiet rooms with laughter and activity. On the anniversary of the day Miles had pulled Zoey from the river, they made it a tradition to have a special family picnic by the creek on their property. It was a day to remember how their lives had changed, to celebrate the love that had grown between them, and to teach their children about the power of courage and faith. As they spread their blanket under the cottonwood trees, William, now 4.5, peppered them with questions about the day Papa saved Mama from the big water. It had become his favorite story, and Miles always obliged, though he was careful to emphasize that Zoey had saved herself as much as he had saved her, by holding on and not giving up hope. The twins toddled about, collecting wildflowers and chasing butterflies, their dark hair and blue eyes a perfect blend of their parents. Zoey watched them with a full heart, marveling at how complete her life had become. "Penny for your thoughts," Miles said, settling beside her on the blanket. Zoey smiled, leaning against his sturdy shoulder. "I was just thinking about how rich we are," she replied. "Not in money, but in everything that matters." Miles nodded, his arms slipping around her waist. "Richest man in Colorado, that's me." As the children played and the creek bubbled nearby, Zoey reflected on their journey. There had been challenges along the way, difficult winters, the hardship of a twin pregnancy, the constant work of expanding the ranch. But through it all, their partnership had remained strong, their love deepening with each obstacle overcome. Miles had become a respected leader in the community, serving on the town council and helping to establish Manassas's first proper school. Zoey had found her own place, teaching part-time when the children allowed, and organizing the town's first lending library. Together, they had built not just a successful ranch but a meaningful life, one rooted in love, hard work, and the understanding that sometimes, what looks like disaster can lead to your greatest blessing. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over their family picnic, Miles raised his cup of lemonade. "To the river," he said, his eyes meeting Zoey's with all the love of their years together. Zoey raised her own cup, her heart full. "To the river," she echoed. "And to the cowboy who waded in."